Welcome back. Lawmakers in New York State have just passed the Child Victims Act. It is hugely significant. It extends the statute of limitations to allow survivors of abuse to hold their abusers accountable. Now, victims, they can file civil suits until they're 55 years old. The prior cutoff was 23. And victims, they can now bring criminal charges until they're 28, before the age 23. Now, at a hearing in Albany, survivors, they shared their stories.
My abuse happened at a Catholic elementary school in Brooklyn, but I was a really devout altar boy. These last 12 years waging this battle has been so difficult because we have been called anti-Catholic, and nothing could be further from the truth.
Something that my father said to me that has stuck with me for a very long time and really helped me through this movement. He said to me, Catherine, the right thing to do is very often the hardest thing to do, but you do it anyway. And I feel like that's what we have done.
The Catholic Church strongly opposed the bill, fearing it would lead to litigation for a slew of decades-old cases. And by the way, now at least 8 other states are working on similar legislation. And joining me now, Professor Marcy Hamilton of the University of Pennsylvania. She's also the CEO of Child USA. Marcy, a nationally recognized expert on sexual abuse and child advocacy, she's filed numerous briefs with the U.S. Supreme Court for abuse cases. Thank you. And for folks who may remember, you played an integral role, along with the prosecutors in Philadelphia, in a similar case with the Archdiocese there. Talk about the significance. I know you said in many cases New York went from one of the worst states in the country to one of the best states in the country in terms of both sunlight and also avenues of justice for abuse victims in New York.
So New York was ranked as one of the worst states in the country because for civil claims against an institution, so if a victim of a priest was to sue the church, they had to do it by the age of 21. The average age to come forward is actually age 52. So there was rank injustice. New York was along the lines of Alabama and Mississippi. This new bill institutes 3 different regimes. One is it extends the criminal to 28, which they could work on that. That could be better. It extends the civil statute of limitations to age 55, but that is only going to work for someone who is not yet over 21. So for most people, they're not going to get the benefit of that extension except years from now. The big part of the bill that makes a difference for every victim in the state is that there's a window. So for 1 year, there will be no statute of limitations barrier to any individual who's been sexually abused as a child. They will be able to bring their lawsuit against whoever made it happen, against the institution, the perpetrator, during that 1 year period. That's called a look back or a window period. That's what really catapults New York into leadership.
For people who may have heard the numbers I threw out in terms of how instead of 23, it's either 28 or now 52, talk about the significance of this, because I was shocked about the numbers that the average age for a child abuse victim to come forward is 52. Tell people why it takes so long for so many people to feel the courage, or at least that the time is right to come forward, and why extending that window into well into middle age is so important.
So the way that trauma works on a victim of child sex abuse is insidious. It results in both PTSD, depression, substance abuse, alcohol abuse. They often are underperforming with their capacities for their jobs because they are disabled from the abuse. And at the same time, let's not forget, they were children. They don't understand what happened to them. You really have to be an adult to understand that you didn't have a childhood. You don't know what a childhood is while you're a kid. So the best science is telling us that the average age is 52. The median age is 48, so about half come forward by the time they're 48. These are ages that make New York statute, which was 23 and 21, cruel. So the vast majority of victims in New York, until this bill goes into effect, have basically been told by the system, too late. we really don't care about your claims. And so this bill is not just about lawsuits, and it's not just about prosecution. It's about the state saying to the victims, you are validated, we're on your side. And so it's a really big step for the citizens of New York.
Marcy, in terms of why this took so long to get here, as I understand it, there was two principal groups of opposition that have held this up, the Catholic Church and also the insurance industry. Talk about why finally now things changed.
So 15 years ago, when I first met with Assemblywoman Marge Markey up in New York to talk about putting together a Child Victims Act, the very first event we had, a press conference, we had no press and no lawmakers. People didn't understand the issue, and the bishops took full advantage of that. The bishops argued that it wasn't their fault, that it was the priest's fault. Sometimes they would even argue that it was the victim's fault. They would say that all the cases are from decades ago. But those arguments were completely put to rest by the grand jury reports here in Pennsylvania, both the 2005 report in Philadelphia I worked on, but also, of course, this monumental 2018 report that came out from Attorney General Josh Shapiro. So once they couldn't make up those facts, they then tried two other tacks. The bishops argued that this was going to make them bankrupt, and they use bankrupt, and they want the people to think they mean indigent, broke. But what really has happened is there have been some dioceses, not that many, but some, that have been sued and they've gone into voluntary federal bankruptcy. But it's not because they don't have assets, it's to protect their assets. So the bankruptcy argument fell apart, and their last argument was this argument it's unfair, that if the bill only applies to private institutions and not public schools, woe is me, how can you target the church? The church has never been targeted by a law, but they were more than willing to issue press releases saying it was. And so in New York, and this is also true in Pennsylvania, the bill applies to public and private. Once that happened, there was just no place else for them to go, and that's when Cardinal Dolan was the first bishop in the United States to set up a compensation fund and to try to clear cases through mediation because he knew a window was coming.
You know, and I'm not alone in this, when you hear these stories, you just imagine, my God, if that was my kid. But it seems that you almost have to chip away state by state, in some cases more than a decade of effort to do what seems patently the obvious and the right thing. Is it now much more of a momentum shift? I read off the top 8 more states are filing suit. Are most states at this point finally on the right side of the ledger? Do we finally have justice is not defined based on your state's boundaries?
We finally have a much quicker momentum, and it is because the public, in response to the 2018 Pennsylvania grand jury report, loudly said, we're with the victims. And once that happened, you had 15 other attorneys general step up, start to do investigations. You had the federal government step up. You know what really happened here? Lawmakers had been afraid of Catholic lobbyists. And once they understood that the tide and the trend is on the side of the victims, they started lining up for the victims. And now that's really what's happening. So we have 8 states. I've just heard from another one this morning. I think we're going to have many states. And in fact, this is a movement that's global. Chile has considered this. Scotland has already done it. This is really the only way for victims to finally level the playing field and to be able to be treated fairly.
Well, we can only hope. But Marcy, thank you. And I know, along with a lot of other people, you spent a tremendous amount of time and effort over the years to finally see this day come through. So a well-deserved congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Up next, you will hear from a victim of abuse. That is, he describes what happened to him, and he tells us a story from his hospital bed while he was battling cancer. The attorney for that man joins us after the break.